I believe that I came to this earth to write books. I really think that the books, words, are what brought me here. And I believe that my words have done some good in the world, certainly for animals, also for people. And because that's my calling, it just keeps calling.
As a vegan, do you ever feel like you're living in a parallel universe, aware of things that many others don't even seem to notice, let alone acknowledge? I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse podcast. We talk with vegans from around the globe who, like you, are living lives of integrity and compassion with an eye toward justice. Through their personal stories, you'll come to see that you're not an outlier. In fact, you're part of an entire posse of individuals who aren't just keeping the peace, they're creating it through their food choices and beyond. You won't be saddling up, but you're in for the ride of your life. Welcome to the Vegan Posse. Hey Posse, I'm your host, Chrissy Benson, broadcasting to you from Music City, Tennessee. First, thanks for all your support and good energy regarding the highly unfortunate theft of 1.28 Bitcoin from my Coinbase account. The mystery has not yet been cracked, so if you haven't yet, please check out VP special episode number 93, Calling the Posse, Who Stole My Bitcoin? And please share it with anyone you know who cares about truth, justice, and or Bitcoin. The authorities are investigating, but honestly, I put much more faith and confidence in the power of the posse. This week, I'm delighted to welcome back one of the earliest Vegan Posse guests, the legendary and beautiful author and speaker Victoria Moran, who's played an integral role in my own vegan journey and that of many, many others. Featured twice on Oprah and listed by VegNews among the top 10 living vegetarian authors, Victoria has written 14 books, including Creating a Charmed Life, Main Street Vegan, and the upcoming Age Like a Yogi. Vegan for 40 years, Victoria serves as director of Main Street Vegan Academy, training vegan lifestyle coaches since 2012. She hosts the Main Street Vegan podcast, and she's co-director of the Compassion Consortium, an interfaith spiritual center for animal advocates. She lives in Manhattan with her husband, William, a chihuahua named Rupert, rescued from hoarding, and a half-blind pigeon named Thunder, rescued from the streets of NYC. Fun fact, long ago, before either of them was vegan, Paul McCartney bought Victoria a drink. So please enjoy this story and many others from our fan favorite, Victoria Moran. Victoria, welcome to the Vegan Posse.
Why,
Are you ready for the ride of your life?
Woo! Well, I'm just happy to be a part of your posse.
Yes, well, we're happy to have you. And in fact, it's such a joy to have you on a second time. You were one of our very first Vegan Posse guests, appearing on the 9th episode of the Vegan Posse in January of 2023. And not only that, it was getting the chance to co-host your Main Street Vegan radio show back in 2014 when I was attending Main Street Vegan Academy. That helped me realize how much I love interviewing people and getting the stories of interesting people out into the world. So in many ways, you've played an integral part in my own journey. So for all of those reasons, I'm very happy to welcome you back.
Why, thank you. That's fully mutual.
So you're one of those people who really hit the ground running professionally at an early age. And I'm not even going to attempt to list all of your accomplishments right now. But this past summer, I got to witness one of the most recent landmark honors you've achieved, which was being named to the North American Vegan Society's Vegan Hall of Fame. So congratulations on that award, which I tend to think was perhaps overdue. But what I was especially touched and impressed by was that in your acceptance speech, you shared very honestly and vulnerably about how for years, long after you'd embraced the values and ethics of veganism, you still had trouble sticking to a vegan diet because you were a compulsive overeater.
Mm-hmm.
And as a fellow recovering compulsive overeater, I relate 100%. So can you talk a little about what that was like, being torn between your values and your addiction?
Yeah, I actually think it was easier because of the time in which it happened, because now there is so much evidence about not only the cruelty and the animal issues, but also about what a really health promoting way of living this is, that I think my excuses that I had then might not have been as valid. But what the era that we're talking about is the 1970s and the very early 1980s. I finally made it to vegan full time all the time in 1983. But prior to that, just being vegetarian was really odd. And being vegan, I mean, nobody even knew what it was. So we think about, well, you can go to any coffee shop and there's non-dairy milk. You might have to pay extra for it, but it's there. Well, there wasn't such a thing back then. In fact, even to have it in your own house, you either had to make nut milk yourself or you could order white powder from this guy in Ohio, and it came in a clear plastic bag, and you had to trust that it was indeed soy and not talcum. So it was different, difficult. The ethics were clear. I mean, it would have been the right thing to do, ethically and morally, for me to be vegan from the minute I first heard about it. But in my case, and I think a lot of other people's cases, it is often a journey. And you mentioned the eating disorder. I had been plagued with a binge eating disorder really from childhood, and all sorts of interesting complications. My dad was a diet doctor, and at one point, he and my mom had a thing called a reducing salon, these with those belts and rollers that you see in commercials from the 50s. They were kind of the precursor to health clubs. I don't know if they were very healthy, but there was all of this emphasis on weight. I was always on diets or off diets. And so I'd be vegan for a while. And you'd think that that would be one of the times when you'd say, "Ooh, I'm doing good." And I kind of did think that to myself in terms of the animals and that. But there was also another part of myself thinking, well, I'm not really eating the way I should. I'm not getting enough protein. I'm not eating in a way that's really going to help me lose weight. And I would fall off. I mean, I was just talk about falling off the wagon. That was sort of my MO. I would be on the wagon and then I would fall off. And it was tough, but it wasn't impossible, because once I got a hold of my binge eating disorder, which for me came through Overeaters Anonymous and really paying attention to them. I'd been around that program earlier, but I didn't want to do what they said really any more than I wanted to stop eating cheese. And so when I finally really paid attention and in 12-step language surrendered, then I realized that I had been given a wonderful gift, which was the power of choice in what I would eat. And of course, I chose vegan. By then, I had my daughter. I wanted her to be vegan. And it started a wonderful adventure. Or actually, it continued a wonderful adventure because I was already involved. I was involved with the American Vegan Society, the North American Vegetarian Society, writing articles all through the 1970s. I was just slipping and sliding on my own veganism.
So when you lapsed, was cheese the particular culprit, or
No,
what sorts of foods?
it was all of it. It was a lot of it was about ease, about eating out, because at that time, pretty much eating out meant toast and French fries. There just wasn't a lot, or maybe a side salad and toast and French fries. So it was that was tough. Um, and I like cheese. Cheese was one of my binge foods. We talk in Overeaters Anonymous about the kinds of foods for which one bite is not is too many and 1,000 aren't enough. And cheese was like that for me. And a lot of people talk about being sugar addicts. And oh, I certainly love sugar and baked goods and cookies and things like that. But if I had my druthers, I would have rather had a pound of cheese than a couple of bags of cookies. So,
Huh. Interesting. Yeah. I did not know that about you.
well, I think cheese has all the earmarks of an addictive food. We hear about the casomorphins, and I'm sure that's an issue, that there's actually a substance in the milk of all mammals that is mildly addictive, so that the baby animal will want to continue nursing. But when you uh, distill it down into something like cheese, then you've really got an addictive substance. But I think more than that is the flavor, the sour, salty kind of combination. It's that ultimate umami thing in the cheese that is just very, very difficult. It's not really a natural flavor. When I think of an Ayurvedic perspective, we talk about 6 tastes: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, pungent, and astringent. There is no umami. Umami is kind of manufactured. It requires, for example, in the case of red wine, we've got the fermentation process. Cheese also is fermented. And the idea of that salt and that fat, it's just almost impossible to get away from. And this is why so many people even without eating disorders, say, oh, I could do it except for the cheese. So it's pretty enticing. But I find that even the vegan cheeses have much of that same enticement. Plus, a lot of them are full of coconut oil, which is higher in saturated fat than lard. So I'm real careful with vegan cheeses. I'll have a Kite Hill, Tree Line, those beautiful cheeses that are nothing but nuts and acidophilus and a little sea salt. A few of the Miyoko's brands, I don't know if they've changed what's in them since Miyoko left, but some of them were free from coconut oil. But almost all the others, I would not have in my house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I relate to that too. I'm very careful about what I keep in my house. So you have written lots of books, 14 by my last count. And you not only keep finding things to say, but you keep finding things to say that are worth saying.
Oh, bless your heart.
So where do you get the inspiration for your books?
I believe that I came to this earth to write books. And I imagine we all come for lots of things. I mean, I would like to think also that I came to earth to bring my daughter along and to have relationships and that. But I really think that the books, words, are what brought me here. And I believe that my words have done some good in the world, certainly for animals, also for people. And because that's my calling, it just keeps calling. I guess that's what a calling is. It doesn't stop. So, yeah, the books have been really the kind of centerpiece of my life. I love the time writing a book. Writing my books and being pregnant with my daughter are my favorite times because they had something in common. It's this idea of bringing something into the world that would hopefully be magnificent. And it's a wonderful experience, as you know. I mean, you're an author as well, although yours is fiction, which is another world in a way. I'm a very sort of a documentarian kind of person. I write about thoughts and practices, and my genre, if I were ever to be on the New York Times bestseller list, which is one bucket list thing that has not happened for me, but I would be under how to self-help and miscellaneous. So it's not exactly considered the height of literary merit, but I think self-help ought to be literature too. And that's been one of the things that I have devoted my life to.
And do you ever get writer's block?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I mean,
How do you deal with it?
well, it depends on when it comes. I think for me, the greatest amount of block is in between books when there are ideas vying inside me, and then other people weigh in on those ideas as well. I've never self published, and I'm just part of that traditional publishing mindset, the traditional publishing world. Never say never, but I'll probably never leave it. And so when I get an idea and I make some notes and I have some support for my idea, then I take it to my literary agent. And if that person is on board, I continue. If they're not, I either have to rework it or come up with something else. And I actually appreciate that because I do think that other people in the industry are bright and they know what can sell. They know what people would resonate with because they're doing it for so many other authors. And I'm just me and I'm seeing everything through my lens. So there's that. And then sometimes it's even later. I write a proposal and I think a book really has merit and nobody wants it. And if that happens, it's back to the drawing board. And so there's just it's a job, and that means it's not always magical. But unlike many people would say of their jobs that they're never magical, this one is sometimes magical, and so magical that it's worth the rest, because it's almost, to me, it's like opening a window to a higher intelligence. And I am a spiritual person and I do believe in the great beneficence and that life has purpose, etc. And I really feel that with the writing, sometimes I touch something that isn't just my own ideas, my own research, my own memories, my own twists of phrase. It's some other sort of wisdom that comes through. And I believe that if I did that every single time in every single book, hell, I would be the biggest selling author on earth. But I don't do that. I don't know that anybody does. Some people probably do it better than me. But just doing it to the degree that I have been blessed to be able to is really something. It's almost like when a person goes to work at a job, or when I go to work at most of my jobs, people say, "Oh, you're a writer, how romantic." It's like, in a way, it used to be like that because there was a time when I was just a writer, or a writer and speaker. I've always spoken a lot too. But that's what I did. That's all I did. And that was pretty cool. But now, just because of the nature of the digital world, the nature of the gig economy, the fact that books are not what they once were, people have lots of other ways to get information. So I'm doing all kinds of things that aren't writing. And very often I'm showing up for clerical work, for technical glitches, or to take care of one of my other parts of my overall presentation to the world that isn't specifically writing. And there is a difference. The writing has a grace to it that I don't really find in anything else other than speaking. I find it, for me, with speaking as well. Anything that has to do with words seems to be just, I don't know, little glittery in a way that other things aren't for me.
That's beautiful the way you put it. I relate very much. I don't write as much as I aim to in the future, or as much as you do currently, but I will say that for me, when I am writing, it's perhaps the one time that there's no question in my mind that there's nothing I should be doing instead. There's
Very
nothing
well
worth
put.
doing more. So it sounds like you do have some proposals and some projects that did not make it onto the shelf. Is
Oh,
that
oh, lots.
really, really? About how many would you
Oh
say?
gosh, and it depends on how how much of them, how far they got. Some of them, well, maybe only one got all the way into proposal. The agent liked it. The agent took it to publishers, and we just couldn't get a publisher. So
Mm,
that maybe was only one. That had to do with people over 50 going vegan for the planet, the idea of leaving a legacy. And I think that was just a little bit too much of a stretch for the people in the publishing house. It was like, huh? Because even the connection between our food choices and the environment, so many people don't get. And then I think the other thing, in all honesty, Christine, is that as much as I know we all need to care about the environment, that global warming is a terrible threat, and we have all of these other environmental disasters looming or actually happening, in my heart of hearts, that's not what I'm motivated by. And I'm vegan primarily for the animals. The health argument kind of caught up with me. I didn't think I was going to be healthy as a vegan. I thought I could never not be overweight as a vegan with all of those carbs. And obviously, that changed. So I did lose my excess weight 40 years ago, and it's stayed off without any effort for all that time. And I do believe it's a really, really healthy way to eat. And so I paid close attention to eating whole foods and colorful foods and all of that. And that's a good thing too. But I think in terms of writing, at least for me, when I write from my own heart's prompting and where I am at a particular time in my life, that's what is supposed to be going out into the world. And any time that I've ever written something because it seemed like a good idea, or because I needed the money, or when it was somebody else's idea or somebody else's title, like an editor's, and I did it just because it was an offer. And, when you're a writer, it's nice to have an offer. But when I wasn't completely convinced in my own heart of hearts that this was mine to do, those never did as well as the others.
that makes so much sense. Yeah, I think I would feel the same way writing about the environmental effects of veganism and the role of animal ag on the planet, even though yeah, like you, I'm impressed by that connection, but it's not what ultimately drives me or drives my veganism. So do you have some kind of formula for, just better enabling yourself to tap into that magic,
Yes, I do. And it's really about being more and more myself every day that I can allow that. Now, lest that sound like some horrible egotism, it's not my self that's my personality so much. It's to allow myself to be authentic, almost so that the muse will know where to find me. Because this inspiration or whatever it is isn't looking for us at a home address or an IP address or our favorite Starbucks. There's a different way that it's trying to find us. And I think that when we are completely committed to doing our dharma, which is a yogic term or a Buddhist term, it roughly translates as duty, but I think of it more as your calling, as doing what you came here to do. Then I believe that we show up for that inspiration, and it can find us very easily. So when I want to really write, sometimes I have to get very tough about telling other stuff where to get off. just like no, just no. And it's hard to prioritize when you're a writer, especially nowadays. In the old days, when writing was more lucrative financially and that kind of thing, it was easier to say, go away, everything else. This is my job. But in the current era, when everything that I do is my job, it is a little bit harder. So for me, getting up early is really important. And I know other people will probably say for them, it's really important to stay up late. And that's, wherever you're coming from. And my kind of role as a proponent of Ayurveda, I would say, no, we're all supposed to get up early. But as a human being who looks at other human beings, and I know that there are people who believe that they do their best writing and their best work at 2 a.m. And who am I to say that they don't? So wherever that is, to be around for that. Because if I am not up for my best and brightest part of the day, then I'm not going to get my best and brightest writing done that day. I've lost it. So that's one thing. I love to write in cafes and coffee houses. There's just something about having all that energy around, but nobody wanting anything from me. That is the perfect balance. Because just being all alone, I remember an article in the Sunday supplement of the Kansas City Star years and years ago when I lived out in Kansas City, my hometown. It was about a fiction writer, I believe, who lived in Kansas. And he did his writing in a shed, and he had a blind that came down. And if you could read that blind from the outside, it said in very large letters, "Go away." So that was his way of finding that privacy and peace for writing. Mine is with the hustle and bustle all around me. That's kind of energizing the words. It's kind of feeding me. In fact, when I first moved to New York City in the year 2000, I was living on the Upper West Side and would go to a particular Starbucks, 86th and Columbus, if anybody wants to go there. And at that time, they don't have it anymore. They had a big table with a hole in the middle. And in that hole was a surge protector. So that meant that just about everybody around that table could plug in. So you had a lot of writers, a lot of creative people, some students. And this was either before Google or before anybody knew about Google. And you'd just be writing along. And every now and then someone would say, "What's a good synonym for beautiful?" And that was just so inspiring and so wonderful. And I felt like I was getting energy from everybody around that table. So we find these ways to be blissfully who we are. For so many people, that's nature. You know what it is for you. And very often, I think we say to ourselves, "Oh, that's indulgent. I shouldn't do that. I don't deserve that, blah, blah, blah." Well, whether you do or whether you don't, if you're going to do your best work, you probably need some of it.
That makes so much sense to me. And I too love to write in coffee shops. There's really nowhere else I'd rather write. And I think for a long time, I really felt that was somehow a flawed practice, that, oh, if I were a real writer's writer, I'd be writing at home alone. And I have learned to do that when the world shut down for a few years and coffee shops were not open. I did learn to do that. But hearing you describe your process just makes me better able to embrace that aspect of my writing as well. Because, yeah, there's nothing like working in coffee shops. I'm able to tune out the noise and tune out the bustle and be energized by it and sit there for hours. Whereas at home, I'm never sitting at my desk for hours. So, yeah, that's very interesting.
I think there are different kinds of writers, but there is that whole idea of cafe society. We think about Paris in that kind of pre-World War I era and post-World War I era, when we've got Fitzgerald and Gertrude Stein and all those people meeting in the cafes. And I learned recently that the RSPCA, although it started out just as the SPCA, Society for the Protection of Cruelty to Animals in England, was founded in the late 1820s in coffee houses in the Strand.
Oh,
That's where the
huh,
people were meeting. So
huh.
there's a long history of creative ferment in a place like that.
Right, right. That's beautiful. Yeah. In fact, in my novel, Marrying Myself, I do acknowledge the coffee shops where I've spent a
Aw.
lot of my time.
Hmm.
Yes. Because there's that T.S. Eliot poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Are you familiar with
I've
with
heard of
that
it,
one?
but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, well, and there's a pretty dismal line in there where he references measuring out his life by coffee spoons, which is meant to be like a very miserable, sad way to live. But in many ways, I've measured out my life in coffee houses and coffee shops, and I love it.
Well, it's a wonderful place to be. And if you are more of an extrovert, which I must be both, because I love being left alone to write, but I also love talking to people and discovering people and finding people. And you find interesting ones in coffee shops, especially
Yes.
if they think you're writing. And of course, if you write in a bookshop cafe, then you get a little bit of double dose.
Right, right. That's a good point. Yeah, my mom sent me a cartoon a few months ago that was a scene from a coffee shop, and it was somebody talking to somebody who was just sitting at a table drinking coffee saying, "Is it, you're not writing a screenplay or a novel. Is everything okay?" I'm like, "Yep,
Yeah.
yep." So one of my friends and former Vegan Posse guest, Anita Loop, who attended this year's Summerfest, remarked to me that she was so struck by how beautifully you carry yourself. You have
Oh.
that magical quality known as stage presence. And I noted that your new book, Aged Like a Yogi, A Heavenly Path to a Dazzling Third Act, also references the stage. So tell me, what role does theater play in your own personal
Oh, that's
journey?
interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Well, when I was little tiny, I thought I was going to be an actress, which I think a lot of kids do. My mother, I believe, wanted me to be in radio. And so she got me connected with a woman in Kansas City called Lenore Anthony. And Miss Anthony had an elocution school in her home. Now, her claim to fame was, although she was quite elderly at this time, in her youth, she had trained Walter Cronkite. So when I was really little, I'm thinking 3 was probably when I started with Miss Anthony. I just started speaking and standing up and speaking. And I think even before that, I was kind of performing at my dad's office. My dad was a doctor, and his front waiting room was perhaps a bit less formal than many are today. And I would read from my little books and, do my little shows. And I'm sure that a lot of people thought I was a totally insufferable child and they should just get me out of there, but nobody ever did. So I've always liked performing. But when it really hit me, what is the power of being in front of a group of people was in 4th grade. Now, I was a nerdy kid. I was overweight. I had bad hair, and I wasn't very popular. So I was asked to give a speech on the importance of trees. So I wrote it on my Big Chief tablet, and I was very nervous getting up in front of the big assembly, and all the kids in the school were there. And then when the lights went out, the spotlight came on, which nobody had told me to expect. And it was really quite terrifying. But I started to recite, trees are important because they give us food. Trees are important because they give us shade. Trees are homes to birds, and trees are the lungs of the earth. And I went on with more really exciting information of that ilk. But at the end, everybody clapped. And these were kids who wouldn't talk to me on the playground. They were applauding. Now, were they applauding because we were all so into trees? No, they were applauding because I'd gotten them out of class. And far better to be in the auditorium sitting next to a friend that you choose and listening to me talk about trees than be in class having a spelling test. So immediately when that happened, I got a life lesson of when you're up there, you're somebody different. You're seen differently. So file that away. It's going to serve you well. And it has. For all this time, I am probably never more comfortable than when I'm presenting for a live audience. It's just like a hot bath or being under the covers on a Saturday morning. It's just like, oh, here I am. Hi. And I know, of course, a lot of people don't like to speak at all. They would rather never have to do it. So we're all different and we all find the places that light us up. But for me, it's being on a stage. And I strayed a bit from your question about theater. I did some theater in my youth, never a lot, because I learned pretty early that I didn't really want to play a character. I wanted to share my ideas as myself.
So but at the same time, I imagine you do have to play a part even when you're playing yourself. Like
Yeah, I think there.
how does that work itself out?
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't really understand it, but that story, maybe it's an urban legend, I don't know, but everybody's heard it, that Marilyn Monroe was out walking with her friend and nobody was asking for an autograph or bothering her in any way. And her friend said, "That's weird." And she said, "Oh, you want me to be her?" And she didn't go somewhere and put on more makeup or anything. She just took a moment and shifted her self image. And according to the story, within a few minutes, people were thronging asking for autographs because she had gone from Norma Jean to Marilyn before her friends' eyes. And the reason that I think that might be more than a legend is because I do recognize some of it in myself. I feel that when I'm speaking, I really have to draw on the highest and best that's in me. There's no room for my doubts, even though there's plenty of room for doubts other time. And we're not perfect. We're supposed to be doubting and saying, what is this? Should I get better? Should I do this? Should I practice this? Well, that's all very valid. But when I go up there to present, that stuff all has to be set aside temporarily. And I can feel the change happening in me, even getting dressed to speak. Because when I speak, it's a little bit different. I wear fancy shoes and very often a skirt, which these days, most of us don't wear a lot of skirts. And of course, full makeup, lots of eyes. And I see myself becoming this more public figure version of myself so that when I go there to do the job, to do the talk, I'm doing it from this more enhanced version of myself, not just how I look, but this real commitment to drawing on the highest that I have. And I just feel that's all I can do is give it my very best. And then, when it's all over and it's always very stimulating, like even if it's a nighttime speech, I can't just go home and go to bed. There's always kind of some energy going on. And as that energy kind of dissipates and fades and goes away, and it's sort of a Cinderella thing, you take off the makeup, I take off the shoes, and, then I'm back to me. And it's not like, split personalities. It's just the parts of myself that I'm presenting. And I feel like when I'm speaking, I'm presenting some of the shinier parts.
Very interesting. Yes. And so you never feel conflicted between this public persona that you carry onto stage and just being yourself in your regular life? Do you ever feel, pressure to be something that perhaps people
Well,
think you are, but you're not?
years ago, I used to wonder why I couldn't be that person all the time because I really like her. I admire her and I'm a little bit in awe of her. And I used to think, why can't I just be her? I mean, she's me. Why can't I just, spend my whole life like that? But I don't know that my nervous system could tolerate it. It's a lot of being on. And just like an appliance or a computer or anything else, sometimes you need to shut it off. And I feel that way about the public persona. And it's not any kind of conflict because we're the same person. It's not like I'm out there saying, oh, yeah, you should be vegan. And then I take off the makeup and the heels and I go have a cheeseburger at McDonald's. That's not it. I mean, if it were, that would be really difficult. But no, I'm myself. I have my same views, my same convictions, my same talents all the time. We all do. But there is something about that ta-da person that's just a little bit different from the person, and I have to learn to appreciate both. And I have to learn to admire my more everyday self as much as I do my polished up and dressed for Sunday self.
Yes, yes. It's very interesting to just hear you describe describe the process and describe the distinction because we do play different parts in the world. I mean, Shakespeare said all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. And in our own lives, we do have different parts that we play, and it's not that they're necessarily authentic or inauthentic. Sometimes they are. Sometimes we can tell we're playing a part that is not us, but sometimes we just need to show up in a particular situation and be something for purposes of that situation that we don't need to be in another environment or circumstance. So, yeah, I'm fascinated by that whole multifaceted self concept. But one of the most valuable points I heard you make when I attended the Main Street Vegan Academy regarding writing about the vegan message was not to worry about whether something has been said before, because as you put it, everything's been said before. So when did you come to that awareness about writing about veganism?
Well, I suppose I was told that thing that everything had been said before in some writing class long, long ago, because I think every writer needs to come to that. And now that we have access to all of this information, anything you look up is already there. Any title, it's just like, gosh, if it's the collective unconscious, or there are a lot of people who think like me. But I think we have to trust ourselves enough to believe that our take on a subject is worth getting out there. And really, especially as we're looking at the onset of artificial intelligence, to really claim our own intelligence, which comes packaged not only with intelligence, but with conscience, with morality, with history, with emotion. And that needs to come into our writing, our speaking, our teaching, our relating, our engagement, or we're going to lose our humanity.
Hmm. Yeah, very, very interesting. And I do kind of fear that that's where we're headed is toward losing our humanity. But why don't we talk about your new book, Age Like a
Why,
Yogi?
thank you.
So you've got a strong connection with the Ayurvedic tradition. When did you discover Ayurveda?
Well, many years after I discovered yoga. And there's an interesting reason for that that is not personal to me. So I discovered yoga in the late 1960s. I was in high school. And yoga was a sort of word that was out there, and so was yogurt. And they were both weird, and people didn't know what they were. But that's fascinating. If you know what it is, find out what it is. So in the 3 books on yoga that I read, they all said you should be vegetarian. And it really opened up something in me, plus the idea that there was a way to use my body and bring my soul along, because I was struggling my whole childhood and adolescence and beyond with the eating disorder, with my weight, with just not feeling very good in my physical form. I loved living from above the neck. So yoga said, oh, that's okay. You get to bring your soul along. And of course, at that time, the kind of yoga that we practiced, hatha yoga, was very gentle, and it was slow. And sometimes it required great strength. It built great flexibility. And it's still the kind of yoga I do today, although most people now are more doing a kind of vinyasa style that's much more energetic and continuous. But the kind of yoga that I was introduced to really allowed a person with a heavier body and not a lot of endurance built up to feel good about themselves and what they were able to accomplish. So I had been studying yoga philosophy and off and on doing the yoga postures. I lived in a lot of places where there weren't yoga classes, and so that was kind of on and off. But the philosophy was always there. I'd sort of been raised with some of that philosophy. I had a very spiritual nanny who had raised me on reincarnation and some other things that most kids in Missouri in the 1950s weren't getting. But all of that was going along in my life. So it was for my spiritual life. I had the philosophy, and then I knew, about the postures and would periodically be quite religious in performing those. I'd never heard of Ayurveda. Reason being, yoga was part of the information from India, along with vegetarianism, that started being traded way back in the 1600s when England went to India, first to trade and then to colonize. So, as good colonizers, they knew in all of their colonizing that they wanted to shut down much of the native culture and get people to be more British, but not the religion, because they knew that if you took people's religion, then you were going to end up with uprisings. So yoga was enough part of religion, it was enough part of that Hindu tradition that they didn't bother yoga. And so yoga remained. Ayurveda, however, was outlawed. So, what Ayurveda is, for anybody that doesn't know, it translates as science of life, and it is a form of healing. It's actually a medical system recognized today by the World Health Organization. And it has a medical side with all of the kinds of practice that Western medicine has. You've got pediatrics and geriatrics and psychology and gynecology and everything that we have in Western medicine. But there's also a really strong self-care component of getting to know yourself, getting to know precisely who you are as a physical being, caring for yourself with a great deal of customization, and really prioritizing that self-care. So I learned about that in the early 1990s. I was actually dating a guy who had had some of the earlier Ayurvedic books. I don't know where he got them. They were very hard to follow. But then I found Dr. Deepak Chopra's first book, Perfect Health, which I've probably read 30 times. And it's utterly fascinating in terms of introducing to me a way to customize self-care that has been working for me for all that time. Now, a lot of vegans say, but Ayurveda isn't vegan. No, and it's not even vegetarian, really, although the majority of Ayurvedic practitioners are vegetarian, because that is culturally and religiously what most educated people in India are doing, the Hindu people and the Jains. But it's this wonderful way of picking and choosing. So, for example, Ayurveda likes ghee, clarified butter. We know that Indian people culturally like dairy. There is a growing vegan movement in India, and what they're working on is primarily dairy. And so I do everything Ayurveda says to do that makes sense to me and that is ethically in keeping with my own ethics. And anything that isn't, I don't do. And I think, we do that all the time. It's like we hang out with our friends and we love them dearly and we'll do anything for them, but we're not going to go to the pork roast at their service club or whatever it is. And so for me, I do Ayurveda without ghee. And there are just so many aspects of Ayurveda that have to do with food and that have to do with life in general that are so health promoting that I love it to pieces.
What are some of your, favorite takeaways from Ayurveda?
Well, probably my very favorite is the daily routine. In Ayurveda, when you do something is as important as that you do it. And I never knew that, but once I did and I started testing it out, I saw how much sense that made. Because you can have the same healthy breakfast at 8 o'clock or at quarter of 11, and it just sits differently. And you have it there in the late part of the morning, and then your body is really wanting more food, but you're still full. You didn't wait enough time. Everything just gets messed up. It's the same breakfast. It's just that when you have it makes a difference. So Ayurveda is all about living in harmony with nature. And it's interesting to think that as long ago as it was discerned, it was discerned by rishis who were great teachers, the same teachers that brought yogic ideas and many spiritual ideas to the planet, from observing life and interactions and connections. They came to have an understanding of health that is really quite sophisticated. They also came to see that the day has rhythms, the year has rhythms, a lifetime has rhythms. And when you can operate within those rhythms instead of fighting against them, you're going to have more energy, greater health, and greater peace, which of course is going to connect then over to yoga, the definition of which is to calm the fluctuations in the mind. So one of the things in Ayurveda is the idea of getting to bed by 10 and getting up by about 6, because this is how the rhythms of the day work. Now, people that don't do that are going to think something different. But if you can work up to it, try it for a while and just see how you feel. The idea being that there are cycles in the day, and if you stay in bed too much after 6, you're going to wake up kind of groggy. So even though you had more sleep, you're going to feel like you had less. So the idea of when we eat, some kind of breakfast. A lot of people don't like breakfast, and in Ayurveda says if you're not a breakfast person, you don't have to have very much. Have some stewed apples, have some sliced ripe banana with some cinnamon and cardamom. You don't have to have a big trucker's breakfast, but you need something in the morning because your digestive fire, your Agni, that is really behind a whole lot of health and disease, is expecting something. And in the midday, your digestive fire is at its hottest. So it's expecting a real meal, a substantial sit down kind of dinner. And in the old days, even in America, dinner was midday, supper was in the evening, and supper comes from the same root as supplement, which means it's just there to supplement what you had in the morning and at noontime. And similarly in Ayurveda, the idea is that you want to have your evening meal fairly early. 6 would be perfect, no later than 7, because you want to have 2 to 3 hours to digest so that when you go to bed, you're not digesting a big meal, but you're rather assimilating and detoxing. And sleep time is the time for detoxing. You don't want to interfere with it by having a big meal in your stomach. So while the midday meal would be grains and beans and vegetables and all kinds of things that give you a lot of power to power on through the day, the evening meal, it can be very light, or it could be similar to the lunch meal, but maybe a half to a third of the size. And if you have the opportunity to do this, and I realize that people working out in offices often can't do this, at least not during the week. But if you are able to change this or even change it partially, people report all kinds of amazing things happening, that their digestion improves, their elimination improves, they lose weight without eating any less. It just kind of lines things up. And then you've got your 2 to 3 hours to digest your food before you go to bed at 10 o'clock. And then it all starts over again with lots of other delights besides.
And that all makes perfect sense to me. And that is, what you've described is probably the single most area of improvements, in store where I could make the most improvements, I should say. Like as again, as someone who has a real emotional attachment to food, part of me just enjoys that feeling of, okay, getting through my day, taking care of everything I need to take care of. And then my big reward being that dinner, supper, where I can finally just fully relax and enjoy. What do you suggest for people like me,
Well,
aspiring to move in that direction?
yeah, just have a little bit more for lunch. So maybe, for example, if you sometimes have dessert with dinner, have it with lunch instead. And just, kind of give yourself the suggestion of, oh, I love taking some time for my midday meal. And that's when I get my 2 dates with peanut butter in them, or, my avocado chocolate mousse, or whatever it is. And then not doing that at dinner. That's just one way to lighten dinner a little bit without feeling like you're depriving yourself. The kind of bigger plate or bigger bowl for lunch. And vegans love bowls. Yeah, I
I
just,
love bowls. Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
having, a little bit smaller one at nighttime. And it's not any kind of imposed, like, thou shalt not eat in a bigger bowl at night. It's like, you start with your smaller bowl, you see how it is. And if it's not good enough, you just have some more. I mean, we don't want to make this anything that's causing any sort of emotional angst. It's just this process of cooperating with your digestive ability. And this becomes more important as you get older. I mentioned that the day has its cycles and the seasons, but our lives have their cycles. And there are these doshas that most people have heard of, body types, and we all have one or two of those doshas are predominant in us, and they're that way forever. Our dosha blueprint is established at conception, and it's perfect. And our job is just to stay where we were. It's to stay within that blueprint and not let one of those doshas, usually our predominant dosha, get out of hand, and that leads to discomfort and diseases. But regardless of what your personal dosha is, and if you're interested to find out what that is, you just take a dosha quiz. And a couple that I like, there's one on Deepak Chopra's website. You can just Google Chopra dosha quiz. There's also an online store called Banyan Botanicals where you can take a dosha quiz. You don't have to buy anything. And that'll kind of help you know what your own personal body type is. But regardless of what it is, we're all more kapha as little children. So some of the kapha characteristics are a little bit of plumpness and round rosy cheeks and this lovely happy attitude that we think of as babies and children having. Kapha people don't get sick very often, except for, again, the kinds of things we think of in childhood, which would be like runny noses, respiratory stuff. And maybe when they get older, some complications from lethargy, because they do very much like lounging. They could get type 2 diabetes if they're not careful. But generally, that's like our childhood makeup, which is healthy and happy. And then we come into Pitta time, which is prime of life. And that's kind of, 18 to 55, 18 to 60, that kind of time frame. And during this time, this is when we have our most executive abilities. Pitta is an energy of accomplishment. So we think of generals and orators and CEOs. These are kind of Pitta professions. And all of us in this time of life have a lot of that being asked of us, because this is the time of life when we need to get our education finished. We need to get out in the world, establish ourselves, find a place where we're going to live, perhaps a life partner. Maybe we'll have children. Maybe we'll take care of elder parents. All of these things that take a lot of energy and a lot of strategic thinking. So that's all Pitta. And then we come into later life, and some people say after menopause, some people say a little later, but you can start to see it, I think, right around menopause, more Vata creeping in. So Vata is this lovely energy of activity and motion. It's very airy and light and lilting. And so when a Vata person, or a person in the Vata time of life with a lot of Vata going on, is more in balance with that, they're kind of childlike and delightful and a breath of fresh air and light up the room and all that. Or they can be tense and anxious and cold. They don't digest their food well. They have lots of intestinal irritation, lots of constipation, creaky joints, arthritis. You start to show the bones and the joints in your hands and all the stuff that we actually think of as old age. Well, it is to a degree, because that's when it happens, but it's also Vata, because young people who are Vata can have these signs as well if they're out of balance. So the great secret of Ayurveda when it comes to growing older is to keep your Vata balanced, keep your Vata in check. And the way to do that is through just a lot of comfort. Vata likes warmth, likes hot beverages, warm spiced almond milk, ginger tea, hot soup, oatmeal, just all the things that we think of as like, ooh, that's so nice. Warm baths, warm oil massage. In fact, lots of oil, that oily skin cleansers, the kind of thing that when we're very young, you're in your kapha stage, you're a teenager, you don't want to put oil on your face. But as you get into that Vata stage, it loves the oil and it just drinks it up. In fact, the Sanskrit word for oil is sneha, which is also the word for love. So it's really this idea of massaging ourselves, or getting massaged with some wonderful sesame oil or some herbalized oil is a really nice thing. So it's basically you kind of comfort yourself into your later years and you age more slowly.
That sounds perfect for me. All right. Well, what's the best place for people to pre-order your new
Oh,
book?
thank you. Well, you can pre-order anywhere you like. And I know that a lot of people like to support independent bookstores, which is wonderful, because then Chrissy and I have places to go to write. But Barnes and Noble, Amazon, all of them have Age Like a Yogi. And if you like, you can send your receipt to assist@victoriamoran.com. And then you will be enrolled for an exclusive January 12th all day Zoom seminar about Age Like a Yogi, which is a couple of days before the actual book is published on the 14th. And if you're not available on the 12th, you get a recording. And then you'll also receive the Age Like a Yogi e-cookbook. So that's just for pre-order people. And I'd be really grateful if you'd take a look and consider doing that.
That sounds fabulous. I'm so excited to hear all that. All right, Victoria. Well, again, thank you so much for coming back to the Vegan Posse. You are an inspiration and a role model and a friend to so many of us in the vegan world and beyond. The final question that I pose to all my guests: is there a particular word that for you sums up what being vegan is all about?
I'm going to give you my favorite word in the entire language, and I think it very much applies to being vegan, and that is irrepressible. You just don't stay down. You know, veganism was labeled a trend in 2019. Well, if we were trending in 2019, what are we doing now? So we have to be irrepressible. We have to bounce back. We have to be out there when we are the coolest thing happening. We have to be out there when people are pushing other things. We just have to be irrepressible and keep showing up for the animals and for the good life.
Well, perfect. And I'm really going to take that to heart. That is very helpful for me to hear. So, again, thank you. And we close every episode of the Vegan Posse by taking 30 seconds of silence for all the suffering animals, human and non human, who desire, as we all do, safety, happiness, and the freedom to live out their lives without interference. So, Victoria, I invite you to join me in 30 seconds of silence for the animals, and we'll conclude with the sound of the bell. Thank you, Victoria, and thank you, Posse. See you next time. Until then, stay strong and stay true.